Next, we're going to be creating web applications. Web applications are top-level containers. When you create a web application, there are no sites associated with it. You can try to hit that URL, but you won't get anything because it's really just an empty container waiting for site collections to be put in there. When you create a web application, it's going to produce the URL that can then be used to contain the site collections. And here are some examples of different URLs that will be used for the web applications. A couple of things to mention before moving forward to site collections. There are some limitations to the web applications. You can have 300 content databases per web app, 5 zones, so you can extend one web application to have 5 different URLs that all hit the same site with different user security. You can have 250,000 site collections per web app. And content databases per web app are limited to, recommended is 2,000, but it cannot go over 5,000. And one thing to keep in mind is depending on how many WFEs you have in your farm will determine how many application pools that it can handle. The limit is, or the rule is 10 per WFE. So if you have 2 WFEs in your farm, you can have up to 20 application pools. Content databases that are associated with the web application are recommended not to exceed 200 gigabyte for backup purposes. If you're using RBS storage, the limitation is 4 terabytes. The amount of items that can be contained in one content database that's associated with the web app is 60 million. Site collections are groups of sites. When you initially create the web application, there is nothing at the root. You have to create a site collection based on one of the templates that are available. This is done through central administration. This is not something that the users can do by default. You can also create site collections via the managed path sites, and you'll be able to see this during the demo. And personal, that's for my sites. So each user in your farm or each user in your business can have their own personal site, and it would branch off of personal. So it would be employees using SharePoint.com/personal/your ID. Sites are containers for lists and libraries, used to organize and control access to information. Some of the limitations for site collections: you can have up to 250,000 sites per site collection. Some of the limitations for a list or a library: the file size cannot be over 2 gig. That's a hard limit. By default, it's set for 50 megabytes, and there are limitations depending on the operating system that you're using. If you're using Windows 2008, there are some settings that will need to be changed because by default, it's not going to allow over 16 meg. You can have 30 million documents per library, 400,000 major versions, and 2,000 subsites within a site collection. Per list, you can have 30 million items, and per view, you can have, the users can have up to 5,000 items per view, but if you're an admin or an auditor, you can have up to 20,000. And the amount of people that can edit a document concurrently at the same time are 10. A single site collection, employees.com. At the root, you've got the root, and then you've got administration, documents, executive, finance, HR, manufacturing, and sales. These are all subsites directly under employees and within one site collection. Easy to manage, easy to search. Disadvantage, all data is in one database. But easy to manage is not always the case, depending on how deep your sites go within the collection. And if inheritance has been broken, permissions can be a bit of a task to manage. Multiple site collections. If you need to break things out based on company, as you see here, we've got the root. There's one site collection under root documents. That's going to be the record center. There's an additional site collection directly underneath that, or not underneath root, but directly underneath employees.company.com. So in this web application, employees.company.com, there are 2 site collections, and then there are subsites within those site collections. The 2 site collections are at the root and at sites. In each one of those administrative, executive, finance, HR, manufacturing, and sales, those are department sites that are all contained within one site collection. One of the advantages, multiple databases. If the record center that's archiving all the documents, if it gets to be too large, past the criteria, you can always separate that into its own content database. The breaking point to separate sites into a content database is at the site collection level, and they can have unique security. Disadvantages, more difficult to administer, and search becomes a bit more complicated. In this example, we have two separate web applications. We have employees.company.com, and we have another web application, mysites.company.com, and it has the managed path of personal. And from there are going to be multiple site collections per user. On the employees.company.com, we have the root, and then we have multiple site collections branching off of the root. You've got Docs, which is your document center. You've got News, My Site Host, Report Center, Search Center, and the site directory. And then you also have the site collection sites, which is where you would most likely get your department sites, team sites, community sites, things along those lines. The top-level collaboration template creates some standard sites. My Sites is recommended to be in a separate web application, and each of the users will have their own individual site collection, completely isolated from the other users. Choosing a site structure. How to organize your web application and site collections is a difficult question, and it doesn't usually have a right or wrong answer. You can certainly change things around once you do get them created, because it's primarily a content database that you would be moving around. All the content is contained in that content database. So if I need to move it into another structure, it's not that complicated to do. Here are some suggestions. Use a single site collection for foundation only. Create web applications to isolate content. You may have a company that has HIPAA requirements or SOX requirements that certain things have to be completely isolated from your regular collaboration sites, which would include teams, communities, and so on. In that situation, you would have two separate web applications. One would be for restricted content, one would be for unrestricted content. Create site collection for large storage needs. You really have to be careful of this. You don't want your database to go over 200 gig. I've seen situations where it's been up to 1 terabyte, and it gets out of hand very fast. And just to restore or to back up that database, it takes 16 hours. So if it goes down, or if a user needs a site restored from that, it can be very, very lengthy. And you have to look at your SLA to see what the requirements are for that. If you have limited staff, keep it simple. Use a single site collection. If there's no requirements that data has to be separated out and so on, go ahead and just keep it simple with a single site collection. If you're a fairly large company and you're going to have site owners or site stewards assigned in each business that's going to manage their SharePoint sites and their department sites, then by all means you might want to go ahead and just create separate site collections, since they'll be self-administered. Avoid deep site structures. They become difficult to navigate, and the deeper they go, the permissions tend to change, inheritance may be broken, and it becomes very complicated to handle the security and other components. Creating additional sites. If you use a single site collection, create sites from within the site. So you would essentially just have subsites. Create new site collections from central administration, but if it's a sub-site, it can be created by the user, the site owner, the site steward, whoever is designated with that role. Using the service application. Schedule search, crawl external data, internal data. Audit user activity. What are they doing? What are they searching for? What sites are being hit the most? Create audiences for targeted content. And don't let audiences fool you. Even though it's targeted content, it is not used as a security measure. In SharePoint, you only see what you have permissions to. SharePoint has certain file types that are built into the system that it can crawl by default. Microsoft Office, products, there are a variety of different types that it can search for. But then there are several that it can't index. It can certainly pull the metadata out, which would be the properties of the document regardless of the document type. But to be able to open that document and index the contents and to return search results based on the contents, not just the metadata, you'll need to install some what is referred to as Ifilters. PDFs are one of the document types that it cannot index by default, so you have to enable that. Other file types, AutoCAD drawings, Photoshop images, those are other non-supported Microsoft types. PDF search is not included in SharePoint, one of the most popular document types out there, and it's not included, although it's not complicated to add it to the farm. To enable PDF features, you have to add the PDF icon, install the Search Ifilter, and you download that from the vendor. For instance, in this case, we would download it directly from Adobe. It's a free product. There's other ones that you can purchase that give better results, but if you're not a very large farm, that probably isn't going to be necessary. And the steps are similar for other non-Microsoft formats. AutoCAD, and the vendor, if they do provide the Ifilter for it, they will provide the instructions and everything else that is needed for it. So let's go ahead and create a web application. First thing we want to do is open up Central Administration and go to Application Management. From this page, we're going to choose Manage Web Applications. This is a fresh install, so we only have one. What we're in right now, Central Administration, is a web application. If I click on this, I get the ribbon that becomes available to me, and there are multiple aspects that you can configure for your web application. Let's go ahead and create a new one. So we're going to click the New button from the ribbon. We're going to use Classic Mode Authentication. You can choose to use an existing IIS website. We're going to create a new one. We're going to use port 80. If you're using ports that are not the standard port 80, you can certainly change that. This path here automatically defaults to the C drive. You can change this, and it is recommended. It just depends on how your server requirements are set up. Security configuration. Your authentication provider, what is it going to be? Are you going to negotiate using Kerberos or NTLM? If you're going to use Kerberos, it's a little bit more involved. You're going to have to get with your DNS administrator. They'll have to set an SPN for it, and they'll provide the information that you need to give. You'll need to give them the service account for the app pool and the URL that it's associated with. And they'll have to enable it for trusted delegation. We're going to use NTLM. Allow anonymous. For this one, no. And if you are setting up a site, a web application to allow anonymous access for external users, it is not recommended that you would set that up as your default zone, your initial web application for that. You would first set it up for internal access with either Negotiate or NTLM, and then you would extend that zone, and the secondary zone would become anonymous. If you're going to use Secure Sockets Layer SSL, you would go ahead and tell it yes. You must add the certificate on the server using the IIS administration tools, and you'll notice on the left-hand side that it'll provide some additional information for you. It's going to show you what the public URL is. It's not necessary for port 80 to put the port, but by default it automatically does. And when I mentioned the zone about the default zone never being the anonymous zone, if you do set it as the anonymous zone and you're using DPM, Data Protection Manager, it won't work properly. It also, search will have issues searching if the anonymous zone is set to be the default zone. So always the default needs to be authenticated, and then you can extend it from there so anonymous users would be able to access it. You can use an existing application pool. A situation where this would be helpful is if you've reached that 10 limit. If you have one WFE and you've used up 10 application pools at this point, you can have multiple web apps associated with one particular app pool. But just remember, if you recycle that app pool, it recycles all the web applications associated with it. So if for some reason you're having some technical difficulty and you need to get in there and recycle one of the app pools, just keep in mind that it could affect more than what you anticipate. We're going to create a new application pool. I always recommend making it descriptive to the site to reflect the site that it's associated with. Otherwise, it makes it a little bit more complicated when you have to go to IIS and reset the site or do anything with it. Choose the application pool account that you're going to use for it. We're going to leave it as administrator. The database server, if you have more than one, you would associate this content database to that particular server. And then you need to give it a name. You can't just leave it WSS content, because if you add another web application, it's going to need its own individual name. Failover server, you can choose to associate a database with a specific failover server that is used in conjunction with SQL Server database mirroring. In service application connections, notice that the default group of connections already is populated with the service application for search and the usage and health data collection proxy. Enable Customer Experience Improvement Program. Do you want to collect information and send it to Microsoft? We're going to choose no. And now it's going to build the web application. This will take a few minutes. Okay, the application has been created. Right now, it is simply just an empty container. There are no site collections in here. We can choose at this point to click Create Site Collection Page, but for our purposes, let's go take a peek at what's there before we create the site collection. So click OK. And notice when we go back to Central Administration, we now have employee sites. And it gives you the URL. If we attempt to hit this site, you'll see that there's nothing there. So let's go back to Web Applications Management. And let's take it over to Application Management, and let's go look at the site collections associated with this particular web application. Under the Site Collections group, click View All Site Collections. Notice on the right-hand side it says Web Application. It defaulted to the one that we have, HTTP, that's the server one. It's the employee site that we just created. If I click Change Web Application and I go to Central Administration, you'll see that I have 2 site collections created. If I had more, it would continue to list. And if you have more than what you can see right here, you'll have a little arrow on the right-hand side of this box that you can toggle to go look at the other sites. You'll be able to browse to the other site collections available by clicking the arrow that would be available. Let's go back to the web application we just created and notice there are no items to show in this view. So let's go create a site collection. Under Site Collections, click Create Site Collections. Always verify the web application. I can't specify that enough. Right now, we don't have much in here, not a big deal. But once you start getting 10, 20 web applications in here, you want to make sure you're putting it in the right location. We're going to call this site collection Home and give it a description. Employee Intranet. We're going to leave it at the root, but you can see the managed path. These are what is referred to as managed paths. You can modify these and change these, add additional ones, and so on. But for our purposes, we're going to keep it at the root. And you always want to have something at the root. You never want to have a web application with no site collection at the root, even if you just put a blank page there. It will cause a lot of additional problems otherwise. These are the templates that you have available. You have collaboration, meetings, enterprise, publishing, custom. Right now we have nothing in the custom, but if we were to import or add a template that's going to be available farm-wide, then it would appear here. The rest of them are built in out of the box. We're going to choose Team Site, and you'll notice if you click on them, you'll get a brief description directly below it. Under Meetings, all the different types of meeting workspaces. Enterprise, that's going to be the Document Center, the Record Center, the My Site host, Basic Search Center, and then you have Publishing for a portal and the Enterprise Wiki. We're going to select Team Site, and then we have to put in the Site Collection Administrator. You have to put one in here, and you cannot put groups. It will only take one individual user. Well, helps if I type it right. And then if you press enter, it'll resolve the name. I highly recommend that you put in a secondary site collection administrator. If the primary person is out, you want to make sure that the secondary is there and available to make the changes that are necessary. And we are applying no quotas at this time. This is going to limit the amount of resources the site collection can utilize. Click OK, and it'll start processing. Okay, as you can see, the new site collection was successfully created. And let's click on that link to see if it's available for us. The first time the site loads, it takes a few minutes. Anytime you reset IIS, recycle the app pool, it takes a bit of time. And voila, we have our site. And just remember, the first time that you're loading the site or an IIS reset, it's always going to take a little bit longer than normal. If we were to leave now and then come back to it, it would load much faster. And there we have our first site collection within the web application. Notice we have our quick launch on the left-hand side, recycle bin, all site content, and this can all be modified from there. And you have your site actions with all the different ways that you can configure the site. And keep in mind, depending on your permission level, that will determine what you see on the site and what you can do. So now that our site is up and running, let's go back to the service application we created for search. And to do that, we're going back to Application Management, Manage Service Applications. For the service application, we're going to click on it, and we're going to go look at our content sources. Notice there's still nothing has been crawled. We haven't had anything in the farm to crawl. We do now. So let's click Content Sources. And if we go into this content source, we should see that the new web app by default was put in here. There's no information right now, no averages. All that will change once we perform a crawl. By default, they're put into the local SharePoint sites. If your crawl is taking too long, you have too many web applications under this content source, you can certainly pull one out and put it into its own content source and on its own schedule. It doesn't have to stay in here. It just puts it here by default. You can create a new one and move it over to the new one. Now for the full crawl, let's go ahead and create a schedule. We're going to have that run weekly, monthly, depending on the size of the content. I've had some that are so large, we run them once a year and only full crawls when absolutely necessary because they take so long. It just depends on the amount of content that you have. We're going to tell it weekly, and we'll run it Saturday starting about 6 p.m. And you want to make sure that the full crawl doesn't bump into your backups and other things that are going on because it is rather intensive on the system. You can also choose to have the full crawl repeat throughout the day. Go ahead and tell it OK. I don't recommend full crawls repeating. It's not necessary. That's what the incremental crawl is for. We're going to create a schedule for the incremental crawl. We're going to have this run every day starting at, there's no reason for it to be running after business hours because that's when other services, the analytics can be running, the backups, things along those lines, that's when those will run. So we really don't want to interfere with the system during that time. So we're going to choose 7 a.m. Repeat within the day every 5 minutes for 740 minutes. Go ahead and tell it OK. And then it'll come back and it'll tell you how long it's going to run from 7 a.m. for 740 minutes. Okay, content source priority. Select what the priority of this content source should be. It'll prioritize the processing. If there is a business requirement that states that this needs to be current every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, whatever the case may be, you don't want it to slow down. You want this to take priority over the other content sources out there. Setting the content source priority as high is going to give it a priority over the normal content sources that are running. So if you have two that are going at the same time, whichever one is set to high is going to be allowed more resources than the one that's set to normal. For our purposes, we're going to leave it at normal. We could choose to start a full crawl of this content source now, but we're going to click OK. Notice here it's going to give you information. Next full crawl, next incremental crawl is slotted to go at 2:10 in 5 minutes. But let's go ahead and do a full crawl. We need a full crawl before an incremental. So we're going to click the down arrow and we're going to choose Start Full Crawl. Once you've started a full crawl, you do not, well, it depends on how much content you have, but you do not want to just stop it. You can pause it, but let it finish its job before you stop a full crawl. And now you'll see the current crawl duration is 16 seconds. So let's step it out of here and go back to a search administration. Notice now we have a little bit more information. If I scroll down, I now have content source, crawl history, success one. We don't really have much content in there, and there were no errors. And it tells you the duration, 41 seconds. You want to monitor the incremental crawls to make sure they're staying within the time allotted for them. For instance, this one's set for 5 minutes. So if you see your incremental crawls are taking longer than 5 minutes, you'll want to change that setting. Now that we're done with the search part of it, we need to go in and work on the Ifilter. That takes a little bit more configuration. We're going to have to go out to the server, add some files, and add the file type. On the left-hand side under crawling, you're going to see the link for file types. Go ahead and click on that. These are all the types of files that SharePoint can index right now. It can open up these files, index the contents minus the noise words, and put that information into a text file. Notice there's no PDF. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is, I've already downloaded the file we need from Adobe for the PDF Ifilter. So we're simply going to double-click it to run the installer. When it prompts you, click Run. And remember, depending on how your user access control settings are, you may have to right-click and choose Run as Administrator. Go ahead and click Next on the welcome page. Agree to the terms. Next. Again, normally in a production environment, this would never be on the C drive. We're going to leave it with the default. Next, and next again. You would think that's all that needs to be done, but no. If we go into file types now, you still don't see PDF in here. It's been installed in the background, but the system doesn't quite know what to do with it yet. So we have a couple of things we have to do. We have to copy the icon, because whenever someone searches for a PDF document, we do want it to come up with an icon. Otherwise, it'll just come up with a generic icon, and we want it to specify PDF. So we're going to copy this to our root folder for SharePoint. I'm going to open up another window so I can just drag and drop. Go to the C drive. You'll become very familiar with this path. Program files, common files, Microsoft Shared, web server extensions, and this is what's referred to as the SharePoint root, the 14 folder. We're going to put it in the template folder, and there's a folder there called images. These are the different images that are available to the system to utilize. So we're going to drop this icon over there. Okay, I'm just verifying that it's in there. So now that we have that in there, we now have to go edit the XML file that says that the icon is in that folder and references it. So we're going to go back to our SharePoint root, going back to our template folder and XML folder. In here you're going to find a file called document icon. I always recommend making a copy of something before you make any changes to it, just to be on the safe side. And then go ahead and choose to edit it in Notepad. I'm going to expand the window, and you'll see when you come down to the By Extension section that these are all the different icons that it identifies. And when you add this, you're going to want to put it in alphabetical order. As you see, these are in alphabetical order, or it'll make your life miserable down the road. So we're going to copy one of these smaller ones, the mapping key value, the full command there. And PDF is going to go right before this one. And then we're going to paste it. However, we need to change it to reflect what we just put in there. So we're going to change the PSD to PDF. And I do believe that was called PDF small, but we better verify that. PDF icon underscore small. So remember that. We're going to apply it in here. Verify that everything looks fine. Everything looks good. Let's go save the file. Process cannot access the file because it is being used by another process. Go ahead and click OK. Click Cancel, and now I'm going to go disable the search service. And to do that, we're going to click Start, Command Prompt. I'm going to take it back to the root and type in net stop o search 14. That'll stop the service. And let's go back and see if we can save the file now. Okay, it looks like we're going to have to take it a step further and stop IIS. Do remember, if this is a production environment, to do it during a change window. Go ahead and click Cancel. And let's go to Internet Information Services IIS Manager. We're going to right-click on the server and choose Stop. Okay. So now you should see that all the sites are stopped. Now let's go back and see if we can save this document. File, Save. Okay, very good. Now that that's done, we'll close it. And then let's start IIS. Let's go back to our IIS Manager, right-click on the server, and choose Start. And do remember, if you do this during production, you're going to be taking down the entire farm. Never a good thing. Okay. Notice that we've restarted, and you will run into this occasionally. When it does restart, it doesn't always restart the website. Click on the website. Oh, silly me. What we need to do is refresh. Right-click and choose Refresh, and then expand out. However, do keep that in mind. I've done IIS resets before. Even when a web application is created, it does an IIS reset, and not always do the sites come up. So if people are complaining after you've done something like that, just go in and check and make sure the sites in the application pools have started. Go ahead and close out IIS. Now we need to go ahead and start our search service. But actually, let's wait until we finish the rest of the configuration. I'm just going to minimize this and set it aside. And let's click on File Types. Click New File Type and simply put in PDF and then OK. And No for autocomplete. And if we scroll down, we'll now have an entry for PDF, and the icon is being displayed with that. The next thing that we need to do is to do an edit in the registry. So click Start and type Reg Edit. And I just cannot emphasize enough how important it is to pay very close attention to what you're doing in here. We're going to go to Local Machine, H key Local Machine, Software, Microsoft, scroll down till you see Office Server, expand 14, and then we're looking for Search. From here, let me expand out this window, and we're going into Setup, and then Content Index Common, Filters, and then Extension. And you can see all the different components here that SharePoint uses, and we don't have a PDF one, so that's what we're getting ready to do. Under Extension, you're going to right-click. We'll choose New, Key. And we're going to call it .pdf. And for the default value, we're going to right-click and modify, and the value is going to be the GUID that's provided in the documentation. and make sure you validate what you typed in. Okay, all looks good. Click OK. Go ahead and close out the registry editor, and we'll restart the services. So you're going to type net start at the command prompt, osearch 14. It says it's already been started. And that's most likely because we restarted IIS. So let's stop the service. We want to make sure after we've made all these changes that we do stop the service and restart it. And now let's start the service. So net stop osearch 14 to stop it, and then net start to start it. And if you do get an error like I got the first time, just run it again and it should work without any issues. The final thing that we need to do is to reboot the server. If it's a production server, you'll want to put the reason that you're rebooting the server. Okay, so now that the system is rebooted, and make sure that if you have more than one server in the farm that you reboot all the servers in the farm, let's go ahead and add a document to our employee site. And to do that, we're going to go to Shared Documents, Add a Document. Click Browse, and we'll upload what is SharePoint PDF. Okay. Notice that the icon is showing, always a good sign. That means that it's identifying the document type. Now that we've included this type of a document to be indexed, we need to do a full crawl. So to do that, let's go to All Programs, SharePoint Products, and then to Central Administration. Anytime you make any changes like this, you need to do a full crawl so it will pick up all the information and all the new content. Let's go to Application Management, Manage Service Applications, and our Search Service Application. And you can go there directly if you know what the path is. Let's scroll down and notice that we're doing incremental crawls now. This one took 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. So you can see and get an idea of how long the incremental crawls are taking, so you can space them out accordingly. Let's go to Content Sources, our local SharePoint sites, and notice we're not able to do a full crawl at this time, and that's because it's currently in the middle of an incremental crawl. So we have to let this one finish before we start a full crawl. And if you refresh the page, it'll keep building the time and we'll be able to identify when it's done. Unfortunately, since we don't have much content in there, it should go rather quickly. Another option would be to stop the crawl. Tell it stop, and it'll tell you if you stop a crawl, the next crawl on this content source will be a full crawl. Are you sure you want to stop? Let's click OK. And then refresh the page. And you can also click refresh on the page itself. Now that the status is idle, it tells you when the next full crawl is going to occur. Let's go ahead and just manually start a full crawl. So we can go out and index all that content in the PDFs that are in the SharePoint sites. Let's go over to Search Administration so we can monitor it a little bit better. And refresh. So now the full crawl is done. You'll see that we had 59 successes, 0 errors. So all looks good. If there were any issues, you would come into the crawl log and it would identify any problems that you would possibly have. And you could just click on each one of these links and it would give you the results or the problem that it ran into. Okay. Let's go back to our shared documents, and if we go to our home page, let's just perform a search. I'm going to search for SharePoint. And notice we get what is SharePoint does pull up. And home announcements and a few other things.